Welcome to the Module 6 live session for the Ethics Around the Globe course. Thanks for joining me, Tanya and Unica. This will be our last session because class ends on Friday, and then you have a wonderful spring break to look forward to. So this is nice to have a little bit of break between terms, and I can't believe that this is the end of the winter term. It went by fast. So our topic this week is discrimination, terrorism, and torture. So I have prepared this PowerPoint slide, which goes over some of the current events that I have personally observed that raise ethical dilemmas. So we'll start out talking about the first topic, which is discrimination. And there's a picture of George Floyd from last year. I'm sure everyone remembers the I can't breathe thing when he was detained by police and they used a maneuver where the officer put his knee on his neck, and George Floyd had some underlying health conditions and it made it so that he couldn't breathe. So let's talk about discrimination, which is the first topic. So just an open question to Tanya and Unica. What comes to your mind when you hear the word discrimination? What comes to your mind?
I think of people that think they're better than somebody else, and so they put everybody else in a box, and the people that are like them are held on a this pedestal as if the other people are lesser than they are.
That's a great examination. Yeah, for me, the word definitely has a negative connotation. It does not have a positive connotation, you know. And you could have there's the use of the word discrimination, and someone has a very discriminating mind, or they can discriminate a really good white wine from a red wine or something like that. So it does, the word could have a different meaning, but for me, it has a lot of negative connotations. I think mostly about the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and then I think of employment discrimination. Me, as somebody who grew up in the 70s, remembering all of the tension from the 60s about civil rights is what I think about. And I think about the women's movement for equal pay. And I think about, racial equality in the workplace. So a lot of it, I think about workplace discrimination and issues involving equal pay and equal opportunity. What do you think about, Tanya, when you hear the word discrimination?
I agree with Unica. I do think of when you hear the word discrimination, you do have the racial side to it, but I do also think that, yeah, if you have someone that, they think they're better than you, they're discriminating against you.
Good, good. Hi, Stacy. Thank you for joining us. We just started talking about our first topic for this week, which is discrimination. So, yeah, the word has a negative connotation for me. So I think of, and then I think about what I've seen in the news, particularly last year, which was a lot of stuff about protests against police brutality, racial profiling, and using excessive force to arrest. That's what I think has been in the news most recently, and even the last few years, because people have cell phone cameras now, and they're pointing them at a lot of different things. And one thing people are pointing their cell phone cameras at is when people get arrested, they got their cell phone cameras out as bystanders, and they're looking at the way that police treat people. And certainly in the last year, we've seen police treat people of all races, genders, and ages in a very negative way, especially if they were challenging their authority for some reason during these protests, or people getting stopped by the police. My own, personal impression was that the police were mistreating people, and then that was being caught on camera by a lot of bystanders. So this is what I've been seeing on TV and the social media. And then the question again, because this is a course in ethics, is do you feel that discrimination is ethical? What do you think about that, Stacy? Anyone have any thoughts about the ethics? And then we go back to what is ethics? Well, ethics is how we should act. in a given situation, which would show respect for individuals' rights and which shows value of human life, which leads to the greater good, right? Which shows virtue, conduct that shows virtue. So, how does discrimination fit in with our ethical values? Any thoughts on that, anyone?
I think ethically, discrimination is, we are taught to treat everybody as an equal. Nobody is superior to anybody. And when you do treat somebody that way, I do feel that's unethical. And also, you know, on the opposite side of the spectrum with the law enforcement, if you're disrespecting them and not following orders as you should, yes, I mean, unfortunately, some of the officers have chosen to, you know, get too rough. But if they would have respected their, the person that, I mean, that's, he is unfortunate. I mean, I don't want to say superior, but at that point, and ethically, you know, he is follow, respect him, do as you're told, and things would go a lot smoother and you wouldn't get yourself in trouble.
I agree
That's just
that,
my point on it.
okay. I agree that there's never a place for discrimination racially. It doesn't exist. In a positive note, everybody is equal. I do disagree. Not everybody is taught that everybody is equal. That's why there's prejudice and discrimination and racism. And I also disagree with the fact about listening to police. I mean, I live 45 minutes away from where George Floyd was murdered. I went to his memorial site.
Oh,
I also, and then you have Philando Castile, who was killed years before him, and he did listen. He politely told the officer that he had a license to carry and he had his gun with him. So it doesn't always matter if you listen to police. People are discriminatory for whatever reason that they want to be. And it's definitely unfortunate when people decide to wield their authority over another human being just because they got a 2-year degree and they can do that. So it's completely disgusting, and it doesn't matter how much you listen. If there's no doubt that, with what's going on in the news with Asian Americans and Black people being discriminated against, notoriously that these things do occur. So I mean, if somebody hates you, they hate you and they're gonna do what they want to do. It doesn't matter if you listen or you don't.
okay. Thanks for joining us, Corinne. So I'm going to throw this out here because I watched a lot of different webinars and dialogues on the internet last year about what can be done to address the problem. And we've seen a lot of police departments have either fired all the police officers or they resigned. Um, so one suggestion that was thrown out there to make the situation more ethical was to have more diversity in the police officers. For example, if the police officers are going to be serving a community of color, then the police officers would look more like the people that they're serving. What do you think that would solve the problem, Unica, if the police officers had a tighter connection with the community, or if they represented the same diversity of the communities that they're patrolling? Would that help?
It would definitely help. I don't think it would solve the problem, but it would help. Another thing that I saw was they were saying that police officers should live in the area that they're servicing. So, like if you have somebody who's servicing the Minneapolis area, Minneapolis is huge. There's the nice part and then there's the poor part where he was killed. So they can find a nice area of Minneapolis. They don't have to discriminate. Personally, I hate Minneapolis. I only go there when I'm forced to for court. So I've never go there but maybe a couple times a year. But there are nice areas if they want to complain about it being a trashy place. Those officers can move to a nice area of Minneapolis, and then they can learn to live in the environment of the people that they're serving, because that's what their badge is for, to protect and serve, not to wield your 2-year degree over me and then kill me with your knee on my neck. So I think by them living in the neighborhood would help. And then I also think it's with the training. My attorney actually, he went to school with our attorney general here in Minnesota. And he was, and he knows a lot about this case, and him and I actually we watch the trial every day and stuff, and we talk about it. And because he knows I'm studying to be an attorney myself, and he was telling me that there was actually, I can't remember, but there was this big black man that was killed in New York by the chokehold years ago. And he had his hands up in the air and he was saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. But then you had like 4 white officers that were literally jumping on him like animals, and then they killed him with the chokehold. And so I was mad at my attorney. My attorney's very definitive. And I was mad about the situation. And he was like, well, you know what? I actually looked into the law in that area and chokeholds were legal. They were legal at that time. So for me, it's all in the training. You have to have something in there that says this is inappropriate to do, because that can also save people lives. But they choose, I feel like they do train them to be all aggressive. Like there's some military tactical people when it's not even that serious. You're supposed to be serving me, but you're responding to these calls over a $20 counterfeit check as if I'm supposed to lose my life over that. I don't care what he did. $20 is nothing to lose your life over. So no, I feel like it would help, but it starts with the training. It starts with the laws that are in place.
Okay, good. Yeah, you made some really good points there. Anyone else have any thoughts about, so what we were talking about is your thoughts about discrimination. Let's keep moving forward. So there's a picture of another individual who they're also doing the knee on his neck. This is a person who was arrested during the riots that took place last year. And so legally, the legal and technical issue for it is excessive force. The Constitution allows, the Constitution gives you a right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, and that's a seizure of your person, a seizure of your body, a seizure of your property, unless the police have probable cause. So if the police do not have probable cause, they cannot seize your person. And in seizing your person, the job of the officer is simply to detain the suspect. It is not to kill the suspect. So this here would be an example of possibly excessive force. Is this much force needed to detain a suspect? Because that's the lawful authority of the police. The police, like Tanya pointed out, the police do have the authority of the state. That's why it's not a good idea to try to incite anything with them. They have the authority of the state, but that authority is limited, right? It's limited by the ethics, their code of ethics, and it's also limited by the law. And one thing they're not allowed to do is to use excessive force, because their job is not to be judge, jury, and executioner all right there at the scene. The job of police is simply to detain the suspect. Find out if a crime has been committed. If they have probable cause to believe a crime has been committed, they put the person in the back of the patrol car and they drive down to the station. They're not judge, jury, and executioner all there on the scene. So doing that is excessive force. That's illegal. Here's another example. This is another protest from last year. This was in Buffalo, New York. This man attempted to try to reason with the police after they had already been given dispersal orders by their superiors. And Unica remembers, yeah, I lived in Niagara Falls and my parents worked in Buffalo. So I worked that. So as soon as I hear something about Buffalo, I'm like, let me see what they're doing out there. And so the police were told to disperse the crowd. That's a lawful order. So they've got their riot gear on, and this man tries to reason with them when tensions are already high. So here's a question. Is his conduct ethical? Let's take utilitarianism. Let's see if we can apply a moral theory to analyze what's going on here. He has decided that he wants to be a peacemaker, right? These police officers have been given a lawful authority to disperse a crowd. Maybe they're being disorderly, maybe they're engaged in a riot, okay? So they've been given a lawful order to disperse the crowd. Now he tries to get in the way of them carrying out their duties. Is his conduct ethical? Any thoughts on that?
I think it was definitely the wrong time for him to do that, the older gentleman, because they're not listening. Look at what they're wearing. It already shows that they're on the defense. So it was completely I mean, it wasn't a good idea for him to do that, but it also wasn't a good idea for him to be shoved and crack his head open and have a near-death experience. So they were both wrong, but I mean, it's still, I mean, the man almost died.
Yes.
It wasn't okay.
Yeah, so I think this goes back to what Tanya said. You know, there are certain things that we can do ourselves to diminish our risk of being victims of excessive force. And one thing is to not incite the police. You know, they're carrying out a lawful order to disperse the crowd. They got their combat gear on. And if you just apply utilitarian ethics, you know, assuming this is someone's grandfather, someone's husband, someone's brother, you know, he's someone's father. Why should he be putting his life in danger for to prove a point? You know, if he again, if consequentialism, ethical egoism, would ethical egoism tell you to go put your life in danger to prove some point? Because he ended up, they pushed him, he cracked his head open. I'm not even sure he's ever going to be able to walk again. He had to be taken to the emergency room. You know, the consequences of his actions were not good. Tanya, what do you think?
I agree. And I mean, I understand where Unica's coming from. And yeah, there are some people that do take it to excessive, but you know, and no, he did not deserve to get pushed, crack his head. But I can guarantee you he was told multiple times to just move on and he chose not to. There's gonna come a point where they're gonna use excessive force because you're not, you know, listening. It's like you said, it's already an intense situation. He should have just turned and walked away. You're not gonna reason with them. They're trying to follow through. You know, I have a lot of friends that are police officers. I worked as a dispatcher myself. And so there are bad cops out there, and that's not, you know, and absolutely. But there's also always more to the story than what people see. There's more to it. And, you know, but with this gentleman, yeah, he should have just walked away. And I can guarantee you, he was told, move on, sir. You need to move on. And he chose not to. So then they're gonna get, unfortunately, you know, like you said, they're already hyped up. They're already in that, you know, defensive mode.
Yes. And one thing when we're trying to analyze ethics is really, and it's difficult, it's taken me years to get to this point, is to maintain objectivity. And like I said, for this specific example, I'm not even looking at what they're doing. I'm only looking at his decision, right? Because I can't control what other people do. I can only control what I do, right? So just in this, for this particular hypothetical, we're just looking at the morality of his behavior, right? And trying to analyze whether his actions are truly virtuous, you know. Maybe from a Kantian ethical perspective, if he is trying to stand up for justice and for the right for Black Lives Matter to march, maybe his act was really courageous and virtuous. You know, he's going to stand up for the protesters and say, look, police, just back off, let these people, you know, exercise their First Amendment rights, whatever. Maybe Kantian ethics could justify his actions. But if you start looking at consequentialism, what actually happened as a result of his actions, it's certainly ethical egoism. It did not benefit him to get in their faces, right? It didn't benefit him. So it's just another way of analyzing this and trying to just look at his conduct, right? We already know the police have done a lot of bad stuff, and certainly pushing over an old man where he cracks his head open, I think we can all agree that's bad. So we're just trying to figure out what he was doing and what he was thinking and whether or not that is truly ethical. And I think it would really depend on the ethical theory you apply, because certainly standing up for yourself and standing up for others could certainly be justified. But if you, again, if you look at the consequences, if you stop, weigh the pros and cons, then I think most people will not mess with police. If you think about the consequences of your actions, I certainly, if it was me, because again, I'm thinking forward, I'm looking, if I do A, what happens? And if I do B, what happens? If I do A and I get into a conflict with police, I might get killed. If I do B and I mind my own business and I respect their lawful authority, I I live. So that's the way that I think, because I think in terms of consequentialism. So any comments about that, just applying the moral theory?
Yeah, I don't think the gentleman was at all thinking that he was going to end up with a cracked skull. So for me, I have to kind of think about other civil rights movements when people try to make change by protesting. And none of these people are going into the protests or what have you thinking that they're not going to make it home or they're going to come home injured in some way. So I have to say that to me, that wasn't what he was thinking at all, I don't believe. But also, with the thing, well, if I do this, then I won't get hurt. But if he in his heart really believed that he thought he could make a difference by walking up to that officer, I at all don't believe that. I would only do that if there were a crowd of people around me, because it looks like you're trying to collectively make some type of movement, but it's just him walking up by himself. I mean, Martin Luther King, he had a crowds of people when he gave his speech. Everything he did, he didn't do it by himself. So for me, it was not a smart move on his part, but at the same time, he was not responding in any type of um, way that showed any type of aggression. So the force that they used on him was totally inappropriate. And that's how I see it.
Okay, good, good. Okay, so yeah, this is what happened next. So going back to consequentialism and reality, this is what happened. They continued to move forward to carry out a lawful order. They had the authority to disperse the crowd, so they kept moving forward. Um, Interfering with a police officer carrying out his duties is illegal. So he got knocked over. There he is bleeding, and they kept right on going. Now, the next consequence is the day after this, the entire police force resigned. So that was the consequence of their wrongful action. They just all resigned. So like as we said, two or three wrongs don't make a right, right? It just continued to get worse and worse and worse because they all resigned. So anyway, this is what we've been seeing. Okay, thanks, Unica. So discrimination by police. Just to recap, police act with the authority of the state to maintain order, investigate crimes, and arrest suspects. That's what they have the lawful authority to do. However, in the American system of justice, police are not judge, jury, and executioner. Their only duty is to detain the suspect. They're just supposed to detain people. U.S. Constitution guarantees a right to a fair trial, due process, equal protection of the laws, and police brutality. There are many cases involving the excessive use of force by police to detain or arrest a suspect. I think Unica pointed out police are required to follow a standard procedures and code of ethics, and excessive force is a violation of civil rights. Okay, and we talked about this a little bit, again, it's not important so much for our purposes what your conclusions are about this or your feelings. It's just whether or not we can apply the moral theory to come up with a more reasonable decision, because certainly one way to de-escalate all of this would be for people to analyze it and not just be acting on emotions, right? So what would Khan say about the ethics of police brutality? Um, Universal moral rules, could we apply any of those? We talked about applying utilitarianism, which course of action leads to the greater good. And I think we agreed that certainly walking away rather than getting into a conflict with police would probably lead to the greater good. Showing compassion. Yeah, it'd be great if people would show more compassion in any, interactions with the police on either side. Love for humanity, brotherhood. African ethics would, say let's use more brotherhood, and that's what people are wanting to see. And I think that's where this idea of having a community officers and officers, like Unica said, who are part of the community, maybe, having more ride-alongs between citizens and police officers, having more events where there's a feeling of brotherhood, and police are doing some really learning to serve the communities that they where they work, as opposed to feeling like they're enemies, with the people that are in these communities. So we could certainly apply some different moral theories to the issue of police brutality, misconduct, excessive force. Any other thoughts or observations? Great. I think everyone did a great job of participating, and thank you for your thoughts on this. Okay, so this is a really good case because it affects the healthcare community. A few years ago, a nurse in Utah, she's in the picture, was assigned a patient. This patient had been in a DUI car accident, and the patient arrived at the hospital and they were unconscious. Okay, the police needed to know whether this patient was driving over the legal limit. And the one way the police can find out is by getting a blood sample, doing a test on it, because the police want to know whether or not this patient who was driving the vehicle was legally over the limit. And the way they can prove that is by testing his blood. Well, you cannot test anybody's blood without a warrant because that is a seizure. Goes back to the Fourth Amendment. No person can be subject to an unreasonable search or seizure without probable cause. So if the police want to test somebody's blood to see if they're driving over the limit, they need to get a warrant. And the way that you get a warrant is you contact a judge. What is the problem in a DUI case of trying to get a judge to give you a warrant in order to test the driver's blood alcohol level? Does that make it hard for the police to do their job?
I can only speak from experience up here, but I can tell you that it's not hard to get that.
Okay.
As long as they have probable cause, they're able to give that probable cause to the judge. And actually, I mean, they can't just say, "Oh, I want it." They have to have the probable cause. And as long as they have that probable cause, the judge will issue the warrant. Or I'm sorry,
Okay.
the warrant.
Great.
They will do it. I mean, and I'll tell you what, we've had to take and wake up judges at 2, 3 in the morning. And I'll tell you what, who likes to get woken up at that? But that's how it goes, and it's not that difficult to get.
Okay, thank you for sharing that your personal knowledge. So yes, the Constitution requires a police officer to get a telephonic warrant from the police in a situation like this. So they didn't do that. They just came into the hospital and grabbed this nurse and told her to do it. So here she's holding up the hospital's policies on, seizing a patient's blood. Also in America, there's a constitutional right to privacy. So she shows the police, the hospital's procedures, and she says, "No, I cannot take this patient's blood without a warrant." So she gets arrested, and you could see they got her up in the air. I mean, do you think that's excessive force? Do they need to grab this nurse like this? Is this reasonable force? Do they need to do all of this to arrest her?
Absolutely not. She seemed like somewhat of a reasonable person, and I mean, obviously she knew what she was talking about. She had a form there. She was obviously knowledgeable on what she was doing, knowledgeable enough to, I think, piss this um, officer off because she wasn't doing what he wanted. And it looks like he's, carrying his 10-year-old kid out because, they're at Walmart and his kid's having a tantrum type thing. No, that's absolutely excessive force. That was not necessary. She was doing her job.
Yes, I do believe that she probably would have, if they just said, "Well, you're under arrest," she probably would have just said, "Okay, go ahead and handcuff me, but you're not getting his blood." I doubt that she would have tried to beat up this police officer. But anyway, he's, this is what they did to arrest her. He's grabbing, like you said. I mean, there could even be a little bit of male chauvinism here, right? You do what I say, woman, and she didn't do it. So he just grabbed her up like she's a child, right? Not respecting her authority, not respecting the hospital's rules and regulations, just grabbed her up, took her outside. Now, when she was taken to the police station, the police officers' superiors, the deputy, the sheriff, they knew that there was no that they had no right to keep her. So she was released once they took her down to the station and got everything sorted out. And she filed a civil rights lawsuit against the police department, and they settled the case for some unknown sum. So in the end, she won for being right, but she still had to get manhandled by the police, which I think that's unpleasant for a nurse. I mean, when you come to work, you're there to treat the patients, right? You're not there to get into some kind of standoff with the police. But again, the police were not respecting the patient's rights, And then they didn't really respect her rights either. So another one of those tough calls. But it's okay. Tanya says, I believe the detective was fired. Yeah, so I think this is an isolated instance where, maybe this is just sort of a bad cop. And I mean, I understand the pressure. They want to know if this driver was driving under the influence. And the only way they can figure that out is to get a sample of his blood and test it, But there's a right way to do it, and there's a wrong way to do it. And like Tanya said, it's not that hard to get the warrant, and do it the right way. Okay, let's move on to the topic of employment discrimination. That's been a big topic in the news too the last several years. So what do you think about when you hear the word employment discrimination? What do you think about, Stacy? Any thoughts on that? Corinne, what do you think about when you hear the word employment discrimination?
I mean, it's illegal. Can't do that. But I mean, there was actually just recently, not a case, but just here locally in Minneapolis, there's a place called Glam Doll Donuts. It's actually known, it's pretty famous. They have a lot of followers on Instagram, but they just got a lot of heat for lots of employees coming forward about discrimination in regards to color, gender, just a lot of those same things. So it's definitely a problem. It's an issue. It happens a lot more than people would think. There's specific things on the application where it says you're not supposed to be subject to discrimination based off of race, gender, all of those things that you have listed there on the slide. But it does happen, unfortunately. And even they're not supposed to discriminate against your criminal background either. And it happens.
Okay, good. Yeah, one of the things as a teacher, I've learned a tremendous amount from students, and one thing that I keep hearing from a lot of students is that the sexual harassment in the workplace. Sexual harassment is a form of employment discrimination because the big law that governs the workplace is Title VII, passed in 1964. No discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. So do you think companies and organizations are following Title VII? I think we've just established not all the time. And so that brings us to some of this sexual harassment and misconduct. So Roy Moore is someone who was in the news a couple years ago. He was running for the Alabama. He was running to be Alabama's representative in the United States Congress. And it turned out that there were allegations of sexual misconduct. He was accused, I guess, and tried in the media more, of dating and having sexual contact with minor children who were under the legal age of consent. So in order for anyone to date anybody, they have to be of the age of consent, which varies by state. In some states it's 18. Other states it's 17, some states it's 16, but nowhere in America is it like 14 or 15. So here's a picture of some of the women that he was dating, and none of them to me look like they're over 15, you know. I'm sure they're not of the age of consent. I mean, they look really young. I mean, look at her. She's very young. So, you know, indecency with a minor is a criminal offense. He was accused of providing alcohol to this cheerleader. Providing alcohol to a minor is a crime. And we talked about Confucius and Confucian ethics in Module 4. Confucius says that a public officer should demonstrate good moral character, right? So this is what we see in the media whenever there's an election. All of a sudden you see all this mudslinging against all these candidates because each candidate is trying to prove that the other candidate does not have good moral character, whether it's tax evasion, whether it's prior rapes, you know, whether it's DUIs or whatever. The one candidate is always trying to show that the other candidate is not of the correct moral character. So that actually happened here. And Doug Jones was the other candidate. And there were no allegations of any misconduct on his behalf. So Doug Jones won. And for the last 4 years, he has been Alabama's representative, one of their representatives in Congress. So this is one of the ways that, you know, moral character really played out in the media during this election. Another one that we've all seen is Matt Lauer, right? Poor Matt Lauer on the Today Show. You know, he had everybody's respect for so many years watching him on the Today Show in the mornings. And then there were all of these allegations against him for sexual misconduct, even an allegation that he raped someone in his office. But he invited one of his coworkers into his office. He had a secret lock under his desk that would lock the door, and he either drugged her or did something, and she was unconscious, you know, in his office, locked in there. That's the allegation. And then there were many other allegations of his sexual misconduct toward other women on the Today Show. So he lost his job, lost his reputation. His wife divorced him. This is bad. Harvey Weinstein, we all heard about that. You know, allegations came out that he was sexually harassing actresses in Hollywood, and if they wouldn't agree to his sexual advances, they couldn't get a role. And Corinne says this happens more often than anyone would like to talk about. It's true. It's true. And I think again, it's part of the chauvinism that is deeply entrenched in our society, and the abuse of women and children is an epidemic, really, in America. And I haven't seen any evidence that it's any better now than it was 50 years ago. I really don't see any evidence that there's been any real reduction in the abuse of women and children, and the sexual abuse against women and children is horrible. And then
I
we
want
have,
to make a point
go
really
ahead,
quick. I'm sorry, but
take
so
your time.
yeah, so just to touch on that, like the abuse of women and children, but especially young people of color, young women, people of color, of color, I should say. Just I feel like society thinks that younger girls that are of color, that they should be more grown, maybe because they've been through more things, or they're in a different environment. I don't know. I've just watched a lot of documentaries. I've read a lot and done a lot of research, and they almost get treated like, adult women. And they almost get it a little bit more worse, I would think, sometimes than just women in general. That's one thing that I've found in a lot of my research. So
Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And then there's a lot of stereotypes that reinforce and encourage that, it seems like. And then everyone remembers this example, right, from the news. It was even on, I guess, a TV show. There was a joke about it on South Park, maybe. I don't watch that show, but there was like a little child figure in the show running out of a dark room and say, "Oh my gosh, Kevin Spacey's after me," or something. So I guess it's been known in Hollywood for years that, Kevin Spacey was a pedophile, but it was just covered up because he's a wealthy actor and so forth. But this is one of his victims. I can't remember his name right now, but he claims that, Kevin Spacey, sexually abused him when he was very young. And he didn't know what to do. When you're a child, you don't know how to, um, you know, how to express, what has happened to you. You don't know how to, stand up for yourself, or even maybe you don't even feel comfortable communicating it, with your parents. So, that's how people like Kevin Spacey get away for so long. They're doing this to children who really can't defend themselves, and don't really understand what's happening. They know something bad has happened to them, but they don't really know how to, communicate it, or they don't know how to stop it. They're not physically able to stop it. So, you can see that the hurt that's still in this man's face. He's 40 years old. It's been like 30 years since it happened, but you can still see that there's, some sort of psychological damage. And of course, Kevin Spacey doesn't even look like he cares at all. So it's very sad. So at least getting back to the workplace, Title VII, sexual harassment is legally a hostile work environment through unwanted and inappropriate touching, comments, or remarks, or it's quid pro quo, which is exchanging employment opportunities for sexual favors. That is sexual harassment in violation of Title VII. It is illegal. Any comments before we move on to our final topic? Thank you so much for your participation. You really, yes.
I had to kind of chuckle because previously a lady that I had taken care of, she always watched, I think it was called The Match Game. This was way like an old one where the contestants would come out and their answers had to match what the panel, the actresses on the panel did. And the host of that show, when I watch, he would kiss all the contestants, he'd kiss all the female actresses, and some of the stuff that he would say to them, I'm just like thinking, and this is on TV, this is still aired, and sexual harassment all the way. It was so bad.
I'm thinking of Richard Dawson. Was that his name? Richard Dawson?
I think so. I have to look it up again. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I was watching it one day. Go ahead.
No, you're right. I remember that. I think it was Richard Dawson. It might have been on the Family Feud. And he would definitely, he was touching people. He was almost slapping their bottoms. He was kissing women. If anybody tried to do that now, they would be arrested. Because that's assault. That's a crime. Kissing somebody when they don't want to be kissed, that's assault. So yeah, now he would be arrested, he'd be fired, he'd be sued. But yeah, back in the 70s, it was like, oh, that's so cute. He kisses every woman, and he touches them on the shoulder. And yeah, it's sexual harassment. Good example. I think his name is Richard Dawson. I think it was the Family Feud. Steve Harvey is the TV show host now, and he does not touch anybody because he wants to keep his millions of dollars rolling in. Corinne says, love him. Yeah, he understands the politics of the game, so he's never been accused of any misconduct. He has one wife that he comes home to, and he's totally a great father, and he knows not to try any of that funny stuff. Okay, great example. So let's move on to our final topic, which is terrorism. These are all kind of dark subjects this week. They're sad subjects. So terrorism, what do you think about when you hear the word terrorism? Yes, that was awful. Awful. Yeah. Yes, for the generation that me and Tanya are a part of, 9/11 will always be what comes to my mind when I think of terrorism. Because I was in school that day, and I was like, well, we're just going to watch TV. We're not going to have a lecture we're just gonna watch TV, you know? And it was very, very traumatic. And geez, so this will be the 20th anniversary of that this fall, Tanya. Be the 20th anniversary of that. And yeah, it's really for a lot of people, it's the day that the world changed for Americans, certainly, you know. We're all a lot more vigilant and we're much more, I don't know, we're tougher, harder people as a result of 9/11, you know, because it just challenged all of our values and everything that we stood for. I can remember. Yes, thank you. We're not as trusting. When I was in high school, we took our senior trip to the World Trade Center. We went to New York City, went to the World Trade Center, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I remember going into the World Trade Center. This was like maybe May of 1990, and there was an amazing World War II display. There was all this amazing historical architecture and really cool stuff, all from the 20th century, all from the last century there. So it had the World Trade Center had was a very important symbol of American commerce, Americans flourishing, and American success in the 20th century. And you know, I remember, you know, really thinking about, you know, how great, you know, that place was and how wonderful it looked on the skyline, and now all that's been destroyed. So yeah, and then we've had all these terrible incidences in France and England, and then the Las Vegas shooting, and just really showing an absolute disrespect for human life, you know, and it's an ethical tragedy. Let me see what everybody's saying in the chat. We're not as trusting. Killing of 8 people yesterday. Yeah, it's very bad. So just to recap 9/11, what 9/11 really was is a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by the Islamic terrorist group Al Qaeda on the United States on the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. The attacks consisted of suicide bombings used to target symbolic U.S. landmarks, and it was planned. I think bin Laden had been planning it since at least the 70s or 80s because he's an engineer. So, in addition to being an Islamic fundamentalist leader and a terrorist, he's an engineer. So, he understood how to use explosives and science. And he was, you know, an evil genius and a mastermind. So, he knew how to send pilots over here, get them, you know, American pilot's license, how to get them trained and how to do this. And it took decades to plan 9/11, decades. So Al Qaeda's leader, Osama bin Laden, claimed responsibility for the attacks. He said, I did it, you know. And why did he do it? He wanted to make a political statement about America's interference in the Middle East because Israel has always been our ally. And since the 1950s, Israel has been an ally of the United States. So our support of Israel means that the Palestinians have less power because we're always supporting Israeli in the Israeli-Arab dispute. So a lot of the Arab people do not like the United States because we always support Israel, you know, which is a wealthy country, it's an oil-rich country, et cetera, et cetera. We have our troops in Saudi Arabia also protecting oil interests. And so the Palestinians don't like that because we are interfering in the balance of power in the Middle East. So to get us back for that, they decided to do 9/11. That was to pay back that and the fact that we have had sanctions against Iraq for, you know, the wrongdoing that they've committed also. So it was to punish us for our political and military involvement in the Middle East. So ethically, what do you think about the ethics of terrorism? Do you think that terrorism is the way to resolve geopolitical disputes? What would Kant say? Let's just start with Kant. Kant believes in the categorical imperative, respect for human life. Human beings should not be used as a mean to an end. I mean, I think that would rule out suicide bombing as being ethical. That's using a human being as a means to an end. You know, a human being, you know, getting in an airplane and turning that into a suicide bomb. Kant was against the destruction of life. He believed in universal moral laws, respect for humanity, the golden rule. Virtuous? Is terrorism virtuous? I mean, does it lead to the greater good? Buddhism, does it show compassion? Does it show? So I'm thinking the only moral theory that could possibly justify terrorism is relativism, right? Because Islamic extremists believe that they are serving Allah and that they're serving the best interests of their group by committing acts of terrorism against the United States. I think that's a form of some kind of form of cultural relativism. People in that culture, the Islamic fundamentalists, believing in terrorism as a means to effectuate change. I think that relativism, that cultural relativism, is the only ethical theory that could even possibly explain terrorism at all, or show that there's, I mean, utilitarianism, I mean, if it benefits their political purpose to hurt us, if that leads to the greater good, maybe ethical egoism, if that is better for bin Laden, if we suffer, if that's better for the Islamic fundamentalists to see us suffer. Any comments about the ethics of terrorism, whether there is a moral theory that could explain terrorism or justify it? The only one I could possibly think of would be cultural relativism and people becoming radicalized and to believing that that terrorism is what their group needs to engage in to accomplish their own purposes.
Personally, I think you just said it exactly. There is no ethical rhyme or reason behind it other than the cultural relativism. I mean, none of the other ones would even remotely make it okay. Not even a little tiny bit.
No, because it shows no respect for human life.
No. No respect for other people's opinions. No respect, basically, period. You know, everybody's no respect for culture because just the way we do things is different than you. The way it's just all around just bad.
You're right, because if there was respect for pluralism, that means that different people could have different beliefs and they could all be respected. We could all live in harmony. You know, just like the Muslims that live in this country, as long as they believe in peace and obeying the rules and respecting human life, then we can still all live together in one country. So I think pluralism, you know, would be the best solution maybe to stop the terrorism, but certainly engaging in acts of terrorism, yeah, it just shows no respect for other people's way of life, you know, trying to destroy the way that we live, really. And it did, it hurt the economy. It killed 3,000 people. It did a lot of damage. It hurt our psyche, you know, as Americans. It really hurt our psyche. And the world's never been the same since 9/11. All we've seen is an increase in acts of terrorism around the entire globe. Okay, so we're going to talk about torture. That'll be our last topic. So as a result of 9/11, Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp was established in 2002, the next year, to detain extraordinarily dangerous persons, to interrogate detainees in an optimal setting, and to prosecute detainees for war crimes. So people that we believe have caused active terror, suspects in the 9/11 attack, were detained at Guantanamo Bay to be interrogated. So 2 years later, in 2004, an ethical group, the International Committee of the Red Cross, decided to inspect Camp Delta to see what we were doing. So, in a confidential report leaked to the New York Times, Red Cross inspectors stated the detainees had been subjected to humiliating acts solitary confinement. There was sexual abuse, temperature extremes, and the use of forced position. So these are what our service members were doing to the detainees at Camp Delta. So is that ethical? Is it ethical for us to detain and torture prisoners of war or those suspected of terrorism? Should we be torturing those people?
No, because they're still human beings. No matter what they did to us, we need to be the bigger people and not retaliate. That's just wrong. They're still human beings. They're still people. They'll get what's
Good.
coming to them. Do it by law. Do it the right way.
Good point, Tanya. And that is exactly what former Arizona Senator John McCain said. He had been a prisoner of war. I think it was during the Korean War. He was a prisoner of war and he was beaten. He was subject to torture when he was a prisoner of war. After the war, he came back to the United States, got involved in politics, became a congressman for many years. And he immediately spoke out against torture. He said, look, we're better than that. You know, we're Americans. We believe in a right to due process of law. We believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We do not believe in torturing people. And it actually goes against some of the treaties that we entered into after World War II. So let's talk about the Geneva Convention. So the Geneva Conventions are a group of 4 treaties and protocols that we have agreed to that establish the standards of international law for the humanitarian treatment of war. Even during times of war, we are expected to be ethical because we're signatories to the Geneva Convention. The third convention deals with the treatment of prisoners during times of conflict. So there was an issue during George Bush's presidency, you know, in his response to 9/11, how he felt about the Geneva Conventions. After 9/11, George Bush was just ready to throw out the Constitution and say, you know, we're going to do whatever it takes to get retribution against terrorists and, you know, people that harbor terrorists. So he said, you know what, we're just going to throw out the Geneva Convention. So because that was a question of law and ethics, it did go before the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court in Hamden versus Rumsfeld said the detainees are still entitled to the minimal protections listed in the Geneva Convention. So our prisoners of war, people that we're detaining here to question about terrorism or anything else, are still entitled to the protections of the Geneva Convention. Well, what does the Geneva Convention say? This is what's prohibited: violence to life, murdering people, mutilation of prisoners of war, cruel treatment and torture. We're not allowed to take hostages, even though other countries take hostages. We can't. Outrages upon dignity, humiliating and degrading treatments, and that would certainly, you know, any sexual abuse, rape, and all that is not allowed. And also the passing of sentences and the carrying out of executions without a court judgment. So again, like Tanya said, you have to do it the right way. If someone is suspected of terrorism, they get tried in a court of law, they get convicted, and then they get sentenced by a judge. So it's not just that somebody is a suspected terrorist and we take them to Camp Delta and we torture them and they get beaten and raped and forced to do all this weird stuff. So Camp Delta has been closed. So that is our last topic for the Module 6 live session. Look, we did it in an hour. So our final live session question is, what is your favorite ethical theory that we have studied this term? You don't have to define it. You can just type it into that little live session box and you're done. So just a reminder, the last day to submit assignments for the Ethics Around the Globe course is Friday, March 19th. So just be sure to participate in the discussion forum and make sure you have your original post and your reply post due by Friday. I know you're used to doing that on Saturday, but winter term 2 ends on Friday. So I hope everyone has enjoyed the quarter. Just take some time and reflect on the ethical theories and you know, which one is your favorite. There's no written assignment for this week. And again, any of your outstanding assignments, you can submit those by Friday at midnight Central Standard Time. Any questions or comments or observations? Thank you so much, Tanya, Stacy, and Corinne for participating in our last live session. I'm just going to miss all of you so much. You've been such great and wonderful students, and I just appreciate all of your hard work this term. If you have any questions, you know, feel free to reach out. I'm just a phone call or a text message away. And just everyone who's watching the video, just be sure to submit that answer to the live session question by Friday. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Corinne. Thanks, Stacy. Have a nice night. And everyone at home, it's been a pleasure having all of you in the Ethics Around the Globe course. Please be sure to complete your student survey. That is the only way that the school can get your feedback on the course. So any positive thoughts or comments you have or appreciated, be sure to fill out that student survey. Let us know what you think about the course. And have a wonderful spring break. Thank you.